Beware of little old ladies. Say, Ignoramus Boy, a lot of old ladies have blue hair. Ever notice that?
No, Mr. Fast Answers, not really.
It's from hair products, but they themselves can't even tell because their eyes have lost sensitivity in the blue frequencies of the visible spectrum. Their husbands don't warn them because they can't detect the blue either. And of course, the little old ladies don't believe anything that young people tell them.
That lady doesn't look like she has blue hair to me.
What lady?
That lady, right there.
Maybe it's you who's losing your blue light sensitivity.
Really? You think so?
No, not really. It's the old lady's fault, not yours. Old ladies of today aren't trustworthy. These are women who grew up in the 1950s and came of age in the 1960s.
The 60s? Oh my God, I've heard about those times. That's when the hippies almost destroyed America.
Not almost. The hippies really did destroy America. Before the 60s, American women knew who they were. They wore dresses in their homes as well as in their workplaces. They even dressed up to go fishing. Men wore suits and ties to mark themselves as viable players in the game of life. People actually read in those days. Then the Beatles came. Young men grew their hair long. Black people started wearing afros. Smiley faces and bumper stickers replaced thoughtful conversation. Tie-dyed clothing highlighted the psychedelic LSD experience. It was a living hell, a revolution of bell-bottoms and turtleneck sweaters. Now everybody dresses like hippies. Young men wear scruffy beards and blue jeans. Young women wear tattoos. Multiculturalism is everywhere.
Wow, and you say it was the little old ladies who did all this? I mean, little old ladies like my grandmother? She was a young woman back in the 1960s.
Yep, your grandmother is to blame, all right. You may think that the worst thing she ever does is steal condiment packages from restaurants, but you would be wrong about that. She is responsible for the ruination of America. She and her entire generation.
That's not how I think of her. I think of her as belonging to the good America, the America before the time that the hippies came.
Don't believe a word of it. Just because your grandmother has blue hair and is all wrinkled doesn't mean that she did not ruin America. It was her generation who gave us the Frisbee and the hula hoop and introduced for all future Americans a culture of casual decadence and narcissism and indifference to basic standards of decency. For the sake of your grandmother's generation, fun and self-indulgence trumped civic duty. Psychedelic experimentation with neurological self-destruction was called consciousness raising. And women like your grandmother were in the middle of it all, dressed in miniskirts and go-go boots.
My grandmother doesn't dress like that anymore.
Grandmothers of today are nothing like the grandmothers of the past. Little old ladies are not to be trusted these days. The first wave of hippie chicks from the 1960s are now in their 60s or 70s, and they are taking drugs again, as are their mothers.
My grandmother does not take drugs.
Don't be fooled by their outward appearance. These women saw Cassius Clay turn into Muhammad Ali. They watched the live broadcast of the first man walking on the moon. These women have seen their traditional role as housewife shift to the modern-day role of women as wage earner and home manager and spiritual leader and everything else a human being might possibly be. No person should ever have to put up with all the role-shifting political jockeying and mind-blowing marketing manipulations that these women have been subjected to. Don't kid yourself. Old women are not to be trusted.
I trust my grandmother. She's a tough old lady.
Of course she's a tough old lady. When she was a young woman in the year 1968, Valerie Solanas shot Andy Warhol. James Earl Ray shot Martin Luther King. Sirhan Sirhan shot Robert F. Kennedy. These women grew up at a time when people did not wear bicycle helmets, when cars were not yet equipped with seat belts and airbags. Lead-based paint and asbestos were everywhere. Young women in the 1960s had to be tough. They were exposed to political movements such as environmentalism, the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, and the anti-Vietnam War protests. Now that they've made it through all that, they feel empowered. They're tough, and they still feel like they can get their way. When they were younger, they were hung up on bad boys like Ray Charles, or like Elvis, or worse of the worse, Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. This was the first generation of women to throw panties at Tom Jones.
Now you're talking. That sounds like my grandma.
Little old ladies like your grandmother were the front wave of a generation that is popularly called the baby boom generation. Professional demographers see this generation as something akin to a rat that has been swallowed by a snake. Like a rat migrating down the digestive system of a python, the baby boom generation slowly moves down the intestinal tract of U.S. history until it will finally be excreted by the great anus of time.
You're right. That is exactly what demographers say about the baby boom generation. What's going to happen when they're gone?
When the last of the old ladies who were once hippies are finally gone, and the baby boom generation is no more, American civilization will return to the 1950s, when men were men and women were women. Core American values will rule the day. American corporations will rule the world. Everybody will know their place, and nobody will question the difference between right and wrong.
I hope we won't have to go back to using phones with cords and rotary dials.
No, you'll be able to keep your cell phone.